I guess the easiest and best way to start talking about Maximum Apocalypse, the role-playing game, is to first ask that proverbial question, like, what is Maximum Apocalypse, the role-playing game? Well, it's a D100 post-apocalyptic tabletop role-playing game based on a board game of the same name that seeks to immerse players into an environment where all of the conceivable apocalypse scenarios have happened, where there are aliens invaded, there's been a nuclear holocaust, the zombie apocalypse has begun, there are killer robots everywhere, giant kaiju have smashed cities, the world itself has turned upside down or turned inside out even. It's just a big ball of every conceivable apocalypse sort of happening in the same place. And it focuses on the core survival actions that players might need to do, like scavenging, eating, living in general, dealing with like enemies. It's the kind of world where you'd imagine that would exist if every one of your favorite post-apocalyptic movies or books or video games or whatever they've all happened. And so it's a world where they have all happened, and therefore the players are playing the role of survivors who've banded together in this post-apocalyptic wasteland to find resources and survive dangers. So at its core, it's a game based on a board game, and it started in 2017 when the board game was still in Kickstarter. I originally thought that it was a really cool world where like this whole place was full of like aliens that had invaded and robots were going about being Terminators, and zombies existed because the Z virus had escaped and was like from maybe a lab or something, and it was part of the bioweapons used for a war or something like that. And so I approached the company, Rock Manor Games, and I approached Mike Nade specifically, who is there, and I said, hey, like, this is a really cool world that you've created. Would you ever consider making it an RPG? Because this would be a great RPG universe. Like, people could do whatever they wanted, and game masters could throw, enemies in whenever they needed. Like, if people got bored fighting certain kinds of enemies, like they do with other more popular games, you just throw in new enemies. They could just be there. And he said that sounds like a great idea, but he had no experience with tabletop RPGs. So I said I told him I could make something and see what it looked like, and then it became the project. And now it's a game that we're gonna have out here soon. I don't know when you're listening to this, but if it's before the summer of 2020, then it's not out yet. But if it's after the summer of 2020, it's on a shelf somewhere or on a website. You can go order it and buy it and play it. But at its core, it sort of seeks to expand on the board game and immerse players in this sort of post-apocalyptic world where players take on the role of survivors living in this environment, and surviving based on their abilities to survive the specific apocalypses. So each character that the players play is dealing with this world of alien invaders and diseases and mutants and radiation and killer robots and kaiju and supernatural horrors and zombies and whatever all. But they're doing it after they've survived a specific apocalypse that has a direct influence on the character's skills and knowledge. Now, there are some games where you play, where you have like backgrounds and stuff, and in this game, backgrounds actually ultimately do matter to the character. They don't just disappear after you've created the character. Like an example of this would be something like if your character managed to escape the zombies, they're a lot more clever and maybe sneakier. Because they had to sneak around, or if you happen to have crawled out from underneath like a collapsed building, where you fell into a chasm and you had to climb your way out, you're probably going to be stronger and better at it. Or heaven forbid you've lived in the Mad Maxian world where you had to like fight to survive, and now you are better at fighting in general, or driving or crafting, or you dealt with robots, so you're better at hacking, or you were an alien abductee and now you know that they have psychic powers, you know how to use their technology and things like that. These do matter in the end when you have your character, because in the end your characters are roaming together in the wasteland. But like focusing on like what you have to do to survive that wasteland is sort of the core of the game. And sometimes that sort of follows the old tropes of like man versus self, where you gotta like, work through your own fears and overcome dangers, or your disease, and you've got to overcome it. Right. And so there's that, or maybe you've got to maintain gear. You got to find food in this environment, so you have to fight the environment. So man versus the environment, or heaven forbid you get attacked by an enemy, and then it becomes a man versus man, classic man versus man storyline. But like you just have to. This is the world that you live in. You're roaming around, dealing with your enemies. You're dealing with the fact that your gear is breaking down. You have to scavenge and find pieces and repair it and craft it and make new stuff. And like it's a game where everyone works together with their special abilities and they just survive. And it's really impossible to survive alone. You could probably do it. You could probably make a good character. I'm sure someone out there will make a character that could be a solo survivor. And I'm even writing a solo survivor adventure for new players who want to be interested in finding out more about the game, but maybe can't find a group to play it with. So there are ways to survive solo, but it's going to be better if you have friends, which is sort of where the party comes in, right? Like that's why you have groups of parties. But like it's a game where it's designed to be for people who are resourceful, for people who like to figure out how like solutions to problems, and they don't necessarily like to just chop their way through every problem. But maybe they want to craft their way through a problem, or maybe they want to just jump over the problem and run past it. These are all valid options, but it really is a matter of being resourceful, and I mean that like quite literally. Gear is a heavy component in the game, and this game, one of the things that I decided to do was to sort of look at like what can and should everyone do during a post-apocalyptic world. Like what should they be doing to survive, or what can they do to survive? And I wanted to make sure that I created character abilities that sort of reflected that. And some of the core things in a survivor situation, like I said before, is going to be eating, maintaining gear, fighting off enemies. So everyone kind of ends up being like a somewhere in between the spectrum of like a warrior and a tech character. But like if you have gear, like in most games you have gear, and a lot of games that I play, I end up with gear that I just have in my inventory that I don't use. I just end up just sort of throwing it away. Or never using it. It just sits there taking up space on my character sheet or in the backpack or something. But this game allows you, if the gear you have is not useful to you, and all gear in this game has some use, it does something for you. It gives advantage on something, or it's used for a specific task, which then gives you advantage on something, or whatnot. If it's not useful to you for whatever reason, you can take it apart and you can reconstitute into something else. A perfect example of that is a fishing rod. Right? A fishing rod and line may not be tremendously useful for you, though fishing is definitely one of the things you probably want to be able to do, because hunting and foraging are definitely necessary survival tactics in a post-apocalyptic world. But let's say your fishing rod and stuff has not been helping you at all. So maybe you decide to break that apart and then use those pieces to build a relatively light bow, and use it for your hunting. And so then you've got it to be able to hunt with it. You should take it apart and then you reconstitute and build something else with the parts that you have. And that's the kind of thing that this game allows you to do. And thanks to feedback from a lot of the playtesters, I was able to create this game where that was the goal. Like you could be able to survive an apocalypse environment and do all kinds of resourceful stuff, and that's totally what the game expects from you. But even so, like with all the feedback, there's a lot of things that I also put into this game that I really wanted to see in a game that I had yet to see or had encountered a few times and didn't notice that it wasn't being capitalized by other games. Or feedback led me to do other things that people wanted to see. So ultimately, it was made by other gamers who were trying to do things in other games and were sort of frustrated with what they couldn't do or wanted to do, and it didn't really work out very well. So if you're an RPG person, you've probably created a non-traditional character or done something or tried to make something that you were wanting to see happen, a support character or even just like a character who had like a cool ability that wasn't necessarily part of the main focus of the game. And it didn't really work out for you, or it was boring. But in this game, everyone does stuff like non-combat stuff like crafting and hunting. Those things matter. Like having the survival skill is definitely important because it relates specifically to the kind of thing that you do in a post-apocalyptic environment. It is one of the things with how you deal with your limited resources. You have to be able to hunt and forage, or you have to be able to scavenge. You have to be able to craft and repair gear that breaks down. You have to be able to live through fights, and this game doesn't have like magic healing. Magic's not really a thing, so you have to learn how to patch people's wounds up and let them get better, and you have to be able to do that. And combat matters still too. Like I seem to like. I think it sounds like I'm sort of focusing on the non-combat aspects of the game because I think those are things that people tend to miss when they're playing a lot of more combat-oriented games. But combat matters in this game too. There's a lot of enemies. They're going to come at you in a lot of different ways, and they basically either want your resources because they're bandits or mutants, or they just generally want you because they're an alien and they want to harvest you for their parts, or they're a robot and they just want you dead because they're tired of human stuff. Like they're going to come at you. And so being a combat character also matters because you have to be able to fight off these enemies when they come along. Like you might be able to talk your way out if you're playing like a priest or something. You might be able to convince a group of mutants or a group of bandits to back off and leave you alone. And that's super great. That's a wonderful way to handle that. But sometimes push comes to shove and you have to end up pulling a gun on somebody. And that's sort of where this world is at in this post-apocalyptic world. There's many ways to survive, and it doesn't really require you to be one type of character. It's sort of like a spectrum where you fall on the two ends of the non-combat combat character, and you roam this wasteland with your party, learning to survive just so you can eat and scavenge and go through the next day and keep surviving in this bleak environment that allows game masters of this toolbox to create this sort of world that explores the ideas of like a post-apocalyptic world, or like what it means to survive when tech fails and computers are actually your enemies, and like basic skills are things that you really need to get through it. So that's in a nutshell what Maximum Apocalypse is, and the reason why it's going to be wonderful when it comes out, and the reason why I'm really happy to see it go so far and to get all the feedback I've gotten from people. So thank you for letting me have the chance to talk about it.